The following presentation has been modified from its original version, radio broadcast atop the high tower, transmitted via a network of glass candles. It has been formatted to fit your screen. House Dayne is the most mysterious family in A Song of Ice and Fire, but they're one of the most important as well. We know they live in a western Dornish castle named Starfall, and we think we know their origins. They were among the first men during the Dawn Age, and the founder of House Dayne tracked a falling star, or a meteor, and discovered a stone with magical properties. He used it to forge Dawn, the oldest and most legendary weapon in the entire story. We know they named their castle after this falling star, and used both the star and the sword in their coat of arms. To the outside world, this is their identity, a shooting star and a magic sword. There are 4 Daynes who are central in some way to the plots of 4 key characters. Arthur Dayne was Rhaegar's best friend, and was doing something at the Tower of Joy. Ashara Dayne is rumored to be Ned Stark's former lover, and Jon Snow's mother. Edric Dayne meets Arya, and tells her clues about Jon Snow's origin story. And Gerold Dayne is a mysterious rogue, a thorn in the sides of Doran and Arianne Martell. But there are some major holes in their stories, either because answering them would reveal too much too soon, or because George simply hasn't decided yet.
We're making this shit up.
Or because I'm vastly overestimating the importance of my favorite house in my favorite story due to my inherent bias. This video is about the nickel and iron content of meteoric iron, the spatial relation of certain castles in and around Dorne, and Marvel Comics' take on Arthurian legend that certainly inspired a young George R.R. Blarton. First, the Maesters are lying to you. They want us to believe that House Dayne was established by first men during the Dawn Age, just like all the other boring houses in Dorne. Remember, we think of Dornish folks as racially disparate from the rest of Westeros now because of the mass immigration of Rhoynish folks, but that only happened in like 700 BC. Before Nymeria, Dorne was just a bunch of first men and Andal petty kings, and the Danes were kings of the Torrentine. There's one major problem with this origin story though. It's boring, and there's just enough evidence to support a much cooler theory about where House Dayne comes from, the crutch of every loony tinfoil theory there is, the Great Empire of the Dawn. Past me already made a video about the Great Empire because I know myself, and I knew that future me, whenever possible, would steer every conversation toward where it's going right now. So watch that video if you need more background on the GEOTD. The crux of this theory are the hereditary physical attributes found in very few people of the world. The Targaryens, and Valyrians as a race, have silver hair and colorful eyes, typically violet. Some non-Valyrians have silver hair of varying and unconfirmed blondness as well, but the only other characters who have both silver hair and violet eyes are Daynes. If you accept this is weird, maybe you think, alright, then the Daynes aren't first men, they were just founded by emigrants of Valyria, probably a family like the Valerians, who didn't have dragons. But you'd be wrong. George Martin has pretty explicitly debunked the theory that House Dayne comes from Valyria, because House Dayne predates Valyria. The histories claim they existed in the Dawn Age, so perhaps instead the Danes and Valyrians share a common ancestor, the Great Empire of the Dawn. I theorize that during the Bloodstone Emperor's sinful rule of terror, there was an exodus of refugees from places like Ashai, Iti, and this whole area, and they landed in places like Valyria, the Torrentine, and Battle Isle before the first long night began and the Great Empire crumbled. Listen, I'm delusional, but I'm not so brainwashed that I think any of this will matter or ever be confirmed in the slightest way possible. I wouldn't want you to get that idea. Wait a second. Great Empire of the Dawn, you say? What's Arthur Dayne's sword called again? Let's move on. While there is room for speculation on their origin, we straight up don't know their house words. There is this weirdly accepted, often perpetuated rumor on the online forums and such, that George Martin intentionally hasn't given us the Dayne motto because it'll spoil the books. But this has also been debunked. I have no patience for fake news. The real reason, as far as we peasants know, is that George has written some House Dayne mottos, but he just hasn't decided on one he likes. I guess this doesn't rule out the possibility of containing endgame spoilers, but I think we could just add it to the list of things George is stumped about. According to various forum threads, a Dayne motto was created for a Game of Thrones MMO in development about 10 years ago. It never released, and was later absorbed into this other MMO in 2019, which did release. Apparently, in that first game, House Dayne's words were going to be fallen and reborn. But as far as I can tell, the Daynes don't even exist in this current low-effort mobile game drivel disguised as a browser MMO. However, I did find this wiki page for a tabletop RPG seemingly invented so 4 guys could play it on Monday nights from 7 to 11. If the game is still going, maybe they'll let you join. What's weird is that this site was last updated 17 years ago, or 2007. This is years before that other MMO was in development, and before HBO developed Game of Thrones. But this site from 2007 lists Fallen and Reborn as the words of House Dayne. Elio Garcia said Fallen and Reborn was just made up by some random person for this tabletop RPG, and has no basis in any canon. A likely thing for him to say, but the conspiracy grows deeper. An artist named Gen Z was commissioned to paint a couple soldiers of House Dayne for a Fantasy Flight card game, and the piece is titled Fallen and Reborn. She signed her name and the year, 2010, so either someone who knows something told her to use that title, or maybe she was just a fan of this random tabletop game designed for Derek, John, Roy, and Ted in 2006. Regardless, Fallen and Reborn is my favorite. Elio suggested The Dawn Brings Light, and there are other fan-created variations, all of which connect the Sword Dawn to perhaps the War for the Dawn, and even Lightbringer, depending on your interpretation. Maybe their words are, and now it begins.
And now it begins.
Meaning that at the Tower of Joy, Arthur Dayne was quoting his own family motto, and Ned's retort was cheeky as hell.
No, now it ends.
Leave your theories down in the comments, but their words might not even be important. We don't know a lot of house words, like the Freys and the Tarths, for example. In-universe, lots of people gossip about Ned Stark and Ashara Dayne. Most believe they fell in love at the tourney of Harrenhal, and their child, Jon Snow, was born during the rebellion. Once Ned took Jon from her, to be raised in the north with his new wife, after he already killed her brother at the Tower of Joy, Ashara was so grief-stricken that she jumped from the Palestone Sword Tower into the sea. Cersei, Catelyn, and folks all around Winterfell spread the rumor that Ashara was Jon's mother. However, Barristan Selmy believes Ashara had a stillborn daughter, not Jon Snow, and killed herself after losing her child. I think these two separate versions of the Ned and Ashara story exist because George needed a red herring for Jon's parents, and even Dany's. If the obvious theory, which characters in the book itself believe, is that Jon's mother was Ashara Dayne, or perhaps the wet nurse Wylla, the reader will know to question what they're being told. And Barristan thinks Daenerys and Ashara have the same haunting violet eyes. That sometimes when Daenerys looked at him, he felt as if he were looking at Ashara's daughter. While this does support the tinfoil that perhaps Dany was Ashara's daughter, that the lemon tree was in Dorne, I don't think George is trying to make us question Dany's parents the same way we wonder about Jon's mother. Alternate Dany parentage theories are just not my tempo of tinfoil. Instead, I think George wanted to explicitly draw another parallel between Jon and Daenerys. These two key characters who will most likely fall in love and help save the world. Being told that both of them could be Ashara's child helps the reader connect Jon and Dany without either of them even knowing the other exists yet. Associating similar details with both characters will make their relationship later on feel more natural, since George is sneakily laying groundwork like this. By the way, while Ashara is certainly a red herring to throw us off the scent of pale blue roses, if Jon was a Dayne, and their house words were fallen and reborn, that'd be kinda perfect. A little too perfect. Jon is a Dayne who falls at Castle Black and will be reborn as Azor Ahai, and wield Dawn, which is actually Lightbringer, and he'll save the world from the long night. No, that wouldn't be very George Martin at all. Let's dig a little deeper into House Dayne's involvement with the Tower of Joy. Of course, I'll be assuming that Jon Snow was born there, and that Rhaegar and Lyanna are his parents, because that's just the truth. The Tower of Joy was located on the north end of the Prince's Pass, which is north of Kingsgrave and south of Nightsong. The Manwoodies of Kingsgrave are Dornish, while the Carrans of Nightsong are Stormlanders, meaning the Tower of Joy was positioned right in the middle of the Dornish marches. We don't know whose land the Tower of Joy was technically on, but we do know there's a conspicuously straight path all the way from Summerhall to Starfall, with the Tower of Joy right there in the middle. This will be important later on. Rhaegar himself named the tower, suggesting it was just a random, broken down holdfast that nobody really cared about anymore. This is why, presumably, neither the Manwoodies nor the Carrans cared that Rhaegar took Lyanna there. Rhaegar loved to read and play music, and he often visited the ruins of Summerhall. That's because he was born there the night of the tragedy, as the castle was burning. Rhaegar was a romantic, and nothing says romance like running off with a 16-year-old to make a baby you think will complete the three-headed dragon prophecy, a baby I theorized was conceived beneath the open air of Summerhall, and then lock up said 16-year-old in a dusty-ass tower, while the civil war that your dubiously consensual confiscation of this girl caused is now coming to a head. Because we know that Summerhall was the place Rhaegar loved best, it stands to reason that's where he took Lyanna. When they found out she was pregnant, and the Stormlord had raised a rebellion to capture her for himself, Summerhall was in a dangerous location. Best to head south then, perhaps to Starfall. Arthur Dayne was Rhaegar's best friend, so perhaps he offered to shelter Lyanna at Starfall until the war was over. But they only made it as far as this tower, which Rhaegar named for the joy he found by impregnating a pretty teenager while his own wife was too frail to give him any more than the 2 children he already had. Rhaegar left his 3 trusted Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy while he ran off and got himself warhammered by the Demon of the Trident. With the war over, and Lyanna, Rhaegar, and Arthur Dayne all dead, and with a new prince, whose existence the new king would find very illegal, Ned Stark made a hard choice. He had to choose who he could trust, besides Howland Reed, and he chose to trust the Danes of Starfall. He brought Dawn back to Ashara, Allyria, and their older brother, the unnamed Lord of Starfall, who was Edric Dayne's father. They would have noticed the baby Ned brought with him. That baby, Jon, needed a wet nurse, and that's where Wylla comes in. The only person Ned had to explain Jon's existence to was Robert Baratheon, and Ned told him that Jon's mother was a Dornish commoner named Wylla. This is also the story Edric Dayne believes. Edric is the 12-year-old Lord of Starfall, and he was Beric Dondarrion's squire until Beric died for the 7th and final time. Now we don't know where he is. Anyways, Edric Dayne's mother didn't produce any milk, so Wylla was his wet nurse. And he tells Arya that Jon is Wylla and Ned's son. He and Jon are milk brothers, sort of. Curiously, Edric also believes Ned and Ashara fell in love at Harrenhal, and her broken heart is why she killed herself. Edric says Wylla had worked at Starfall since before he was born. He was born 4 years after Jon, so the cover story seems clear. Ned took Jon and Dawn to Starfall, and Wylla nursed Jon until they went back north. Questions remain though. Was Wylla already at Starfall when Ned arrived with Jon? Or did Ned find Wylla along the way to Starfall from the Tower of Joy? Or perhaps she was helping Lyanna before she died. For all we know, the Danes met Wylla the same time as Ned, and agreed to keep Wylla at Starfall and tell the story that she's Jon's mother. To me, this suggests the Danes might know about Jon's true parentage. As I see it, these are the 3 most likely options. Ned told the Danes the truth about Jon, and they agreed to use Wylla as a cover story. Ned lied to the Danes and told them Wylla was Jon's mother. Wylla already worked at Starfall, so the Danes knew Jon couldn't be her son, but they agreed to tell that story anyway. When I say the Danes might know, who am I really talking about? Not Edric, obviously, because he was told that Wyla was Jon's mother. Well, Ashara would have known, but she jumped out of a tower. The Lord of Starfall, Edric's father, and his wife, the Lady of Starfall, both would have been there to receive Ned. But they're both dead now too. That's convenient.
That's interesting.
Allyria Dayne, Ashara and Arthur's little sister, and Edric's aunt, rules Starfall while Edric is away with Beric. Allyria was actually betrothed to Beric in 294, but they didn't marry right away, suggesting she was too young. 16 is typically marrying age, and Beric took Edric to live with him at Blackhaven for 4 years before going to King's Landing for the Hand's Tourney in 298. This suggests that even by 298, Allyria was only 15 at the oldest, or else their marriage would have happened. So she would have been about 11 in 294 at her betrothal, and only about 1 year old when Ned came to Starfall. She's in her late teens now. So Allyria and Edric were both told only what Edric's parents wanted them to know, before they both died sometime between 286 and 295. Allyria didn't witness firsthand whether or not Ned and Ashara were in love, and she doesn't have any reason to suspect Wyla isn't Jon's mother. The truth died with her 3 older siblings. But Allyria and Edric aren't the only Daynes. Gerold Dayne is the Knight of High Hermitage, the secondary branch of House Dayne. Gerold is in his mid to late 20s. That's older than both Edric and Allyria. He would have been no younger than 9 and no older than 13 during the Tower of Joy. That's prime squiring age, and it's prime tinfoil for Crusader Chris. Gerold Dayne lived at High Hermitage, which is even closer to the Tower of Joy than Starfall is. Walk with me here. Rhaegar leaves his 3 Kingsguard at the tower to protect Lyanna, while he goes off to fight Robert. Arthur Dayne, Oswell Went, and Gerold Hightower wouldn't know the kind of opposition they'd be facing. Plus, it would make sense that 3 Knights of the Kingsguard would require at least 1 squire to help them with their armor, their training, their meals, standing guard during the night, and all the other menial tasks you'd assign a teenager. Presumably, they were at the Tower of Joy for several months. Also, we know Howland Reed wasn't the only person besides Ned and Jon left alive. We're told that they had found him still holding her body, silent with grief. The little Cranogman, Howland Reed, had taken her hand from his. So who else was there? Wyla, perhaps. Other servants, maybe. Ned could have left some men behind, who were just now getting to the tower. Or, if you enjoy broadening the capabilities with which your mind can explore fictional scenarios, then Gerold Dayne was there too, squiring for his cousin, the Sword of the Morning, who sent word to High Hermitage to send someone he could trust, his own blood. Another option is that Ned stopped at High Hermitage on his way to Starfall to pick up a wet nurse, Wyla, and to drop off Gerold, whose services were no longer required. Gerold knows about Rhaegar and Lyanna's son being born, making him a risk to Ned's lie. But Ned explicitly says he'd never kill a child. If Ned did stop at High Hermitage, that explains why he didn't stop at Blackmont, another castle along the Torrentine that's closest to the Tower of Joy. He didn't want anyone he couldn't trust to see him with Jon. And since Gerold Dayne already knew about Jon, Ned figured he'd have to trust the Daynes. And for acting honorably by not killing Gerold, and by returning their ancestral sword, the Daynes worked with Ned, and even named their new heir Edric, who is called Ned for short. My Darkstar tinfoil continues. Gerold says he was weaned on venom, which might simply be a tough guy quote, or the venom he was weaned on was the secret of the Tower of Joy. From a young age, Gerold had to keep Ned Stark's lie and never tell a soul about the baby from the tower. Gerold had to witness Ned Stark and Howland Reed kill his cousin, the Sword of the Morning. And despite being privy to this top-secret scheme, and despite helping his cousin protect Lyanna for months, Gerold knew that he'd never get the chance to become Arthur Dayne himself. That wielding Dawn and becoming Sword of the Morning was for the other House Dayne. Gerold probably felt used and cheated, explaining his Darkstar persona, and explaining his angst towards Arthur Dayne's memory. In the Winds of Winter, Obara Sand, Ariohota, and Balon Swan are hunting Darkstar in Dorne. I predict that Obara and Gerold will actually team up, given their proclivity to war with the Lannisters. And it'll be a 2v2 skirmish that they win, especially if Gerold's gone to Starfall and steals Dawn. Then, when Darkstar hears about Rhaegar's son coming back from the dead to invade Westeros, he'll remember that other son from the Tower of Joy. Seeking the same glory of his legendary dead cousin, Gerold will join Aegon Targaryen's Kingsguard, becoming the Arthur Dayne to his Rhaegar Targaryen. Gerold will become Sword of the Evening, because he is of the night. Oh hey, of the night sounds like the opposite of the light. Maybe that's House Dayne's motto, and Gerold is reversing it for his own identity. That would make Gerold the second Sword of the Evening that we know of. The first was Vorian Dayne, who was the last king of the Torrentine before he was defeated by Nymeria and sent to the Wall. Let's pause the tinfoil and begin the meteorics portion of the video. What is Dawn? I mean, what's it made of? The first Dayne supposedly followed the track of a falling star and found a mysterious, magical stone at that site. A falling star is just a prettier way to say meteor, and when a meteor collides with the Earth, it's called a meteorite. When it enters our atmosphere, friction causes the rock to heat up. That heat makes the atmospheric gases around the meteor begin to glow, and that's the trail you can see in the sky. A meteorite that lands on the ground and creates an impact crater is called a bolide, and that's probably what the Dayne meteorite was, a bolide. There are three major groupings of meteorites: stony, iron, and stony iron. Because the first Dayne found metal at the site of his bolide, let's assume it was an iron meteorite. Iron meteorites mostly contain a substance called meteoric iron. It contains iron and nickel, and it's called a native metal. That's because meteoric iron is found already in its metallic form, whereas other metals must be crystallized or iodized. For example, titanium naturally occurs as titanium dioxide and must be reduced into its metal form, meaning it has to be changed in order to become a physical substance. I'll put links in the description so you can learn more about that if you want. The point is, meteoric iron is already in its physical, metal form when the first Dayne discovered it in that meteorite. These iron meteorites come from the cores of ancient M-type asteroids that were blown apart in the early stages of our solar system, some 4 billion years ago. They travel through space, and sometimes end up as meteorites for refugees of the Great Empire of the Dawn to discover. So the Dayne meteorite probably consisted of iron and nickel, and was cold forged into Dawn. This actually happened on Earth too. Neolithic Turks living around 2500 BC made an iron dagger that was meteoric in origin. Around 1400 BC, Syrians used meteoric iron to make axes. So too did the Shang Dynasty Chinese. That's because iron smelting and metallurgy didn't exist yet. The only source of tool-capable iron was found via meteorites. This tracks with A Song of Ice and Fire history too, as House Dayne was founded during the Dawn Age, when the first men had the ability to make bronze, but wouldn't have the ability to smelt iron and work it into steel until the coming of the Andals. Dawn was probably the first iron sword in Westeros because its iron came from space. If this is true, Dawn's surface probably looks like this. Meteoric iron often has a distinct crystalline structure called Thomson patterns. That's just the science though. The reason Dawn appears alive with light and is stronger and sharper than typical steel is probably just because of magic. My guess is that Dawn glows because it comes from a glowing object, a meteor. Symbolism and all that. This explanation does throw a wrench in the whole Dawn equals Lightbringer theory. The story of Azor Ahai tells us that Lightbringer was steel, forged in sacred fires during a 100-day process. It involved Nissa Nissa's blood and her soul, and various sacrifices. It sounds like a different form of magic altogether, something closer to Valyrian steel. Valyria was home to blood mages, and Valyrian steel was spell-forged, likely with the help of dragon flame instead of furnaces. So no, I don't think Dawn was the original Lightbringer, but even I can't deny how cool of a story that would be. An emigrant of the great empire of the Dawn, who cursed the name of the Bloodstone Emperor, the man responsible for the Long Night. This emigrant traveled west, or perhaps east across the Sunset Sea, until he found the site of a falling star. He turned the magical metal into Lightbringer, a flaming sword he then used to end the Long Night and win the War for the Dawn. Thereafter, the sword was called Dawn and resided in Starfall, a castle built where the meteor fell. Honestly, I hope I'm wrong and this is true, but it won't matter anyway because this is one of those subjects that'll just never be confirmed by George. It's esoteric world building, stuff that's conducive to my low-stakes, crazy tinfoil ramblings.
We're making this shit up.
So I've solved the mystery of Dawn. It's a combination of meteoric iron from outer space mixed with good old-fashioned magic. We know even less about who gets to use Dawn, and assume the title Sword of the Morning. In the lore book, we are simply told the wielder of Dawn is always given the title of Sword of the Morning, and only a knight of House Dayne who is deemed worthy can carry it. Well, what does it entail to be deemed worthy? Typically, a family's ancestral blade is passed from son to son. It's an heirloom. After Rickard Stark died, Ice went to his son Eddard Stark. There are exceptions, because some wielders of Lady Forlorn were not the Lord Corbray of Heartsholm, rather a lord's brother or second son. But even then, the sword is still property of the lord. Lyn Corbray is basically renting Lady Forlorn from his older brother. But once a Sword of the Morning is deemed worthy to carry Dawn, it becomes his. Maybe Dawn's glowiness and sharpness is just where the magic begins. Maybe the sword is a little bit sentient, and the blade chooses a knight worthy enough to wield it, sort of like how a dragon must accept a human to bond with. If this is true, it sort of reminds me of the Ebony Blade from Marvel Comics. House Dayne was inspired by Dane Whitman, the Black Knight. Like Dawn, the Ebony Blade was made from a meteorite. The wizard Merlin enchanted the Ebony Blade with magic for the original Black Knight, Sir Percy of Scandia, who sat on King Arthur's Round Table and is Dane Whitman's ancestor. The Ebony Blade absorbs energy and souls. Maybe Dawn absorbs energy too, and that explains why it glows so much. It's reflecting energy as light. The Ebony Blade was cursed by its first wielder, Sir Percy, because of all the blood he spilled with it. But that's actually what the sword wants. We're told that the Ebony Blade can only be wielded to its mightiest potential by those impure of heart. Other comics expand on this, saying that Sir Percy was the only one noble enough to avoid being corrupted by the blade's sentient bloodlust. So the prototypical Black Knight must be impure of heart, while noble enough to not let the blade take over completely. Maybe Dawn works the same way. Dawn is sentient, and it remains at Starfall, perhaps even lodged into its original meteoric stone, until a worthy enough Dane comes along to wield it. And depending on just how much George Martin was inspired by the Ebony Blade, perhaps Dawn seeks the impure of heart as well. Perhaps the Sword of the Morning isn't always a pure hero. I theorize that in the Winds of Winter, Gerold Dayne will go to Starfall and claim Dawn. He won't steal it because it will choose him. Darkstar is very obviously impure of heart, just like Sir Percy or Dane Whitman. He's ambitious and jealous and bitter, and the most dangerous man in Dorne already. Once he obtains Dawn, just how powerful will Darkstar be? The Black Knight does heroic deeds for the wrong, narcissistic reasons. Will Darkstar fight for King Aegon to get rid of the evil Lannister regime, while raising his own power in Aegon's new regime? Will Darkstar wield Dawn against the others, helping to eradicate the Long Night while trying to etch his name in history and glory? Or maybe the power of Dawn will corrupt Darkstar, and he will succumb to its ceaseless bloodlust. Let me know in the comments how you think a Sword of the Morning is chosen, and let me know your theories about Arthur and Ashara, and what went down at the Tower of Joy. Thanks for watching and subscribing.